What if the crows in From were never there to warn the people? What if they arrive because the disaster has already been decided? That changes everything. Because throughout the story, the crows have appeared around moments when reality seems to bend, when death approaches, or when the town is about to reveal another layer of its secret. We naturally interpret them as an omen. Something bad is coming, and the birds are simply there to signal it. But that interpretation may be completely backwards. The crows may not be predicting disasters. They may be marking the moment the town begins to execute them. And if that is true, then the most disturbing question isn't why the crows keep appearing. It's this: who sent them? Look at what the show is actually telling us. The crows are not ordinary background animals. They carry a strange symbolic weight in a place where almost everything has meaning. The forest isn't normal. The roads aren't normal. The creatures aren't normal. Even dreams can become dangerous. So, why would the show repeatedly place crows near moments of psychological or supernatural disturbance unless they were part of the same system? And this is where it gets darker. The crows don't need to cause anything. They only need to appear when the invisible mechanism has already started moving. Think about the nature of the town itself. People arrive believing they're simply lost. Then they discover that the road won't let them leave. They discover the monsters. They discover the tunnels. They discover symbols, visions, voices, dreams, children, trees, and impossible spaces. Every time someone believes they understand one piece of the puzzle, another layer appears. That means the town may not operate like a prison with one simple entrance and exit. It may operate like a cycle. And cycles need markers. The crows could be those markers. That would explain why their appearance feels different from the normal wildlife we see around the town. Deer, animals, and birds exist as part of the environment. But the crows feel intentional. They watch. They gather. They appear at moments when human beings are approaching information they were never supposed to discover. This is the detail everyone missed. A warning tells you that something is about to happen. A countdown tells you that something will happen. There is a massive difference. If the crows are warnings, then perhaps the characters still have a chance to prevent what comes next. But if they're countdown markers, prevention may be impossible. The event is already locked into the cycle. And that would make the town far more terrifying. Because the residents may believe they're fighting monsters when they're actually fighting a system. A system that knows when they're going to break. A system that knows when they're going to discover something. A system that may even know which person will discover it first. But here's what changes everything. The crows may also explain why knowledge in this town is so dangerous. Every time someone gets close to an answer, something interrupts them. A vision, a monster, a death, a disappearance, a psychological breakdown, a new mystery. It is almost as if the town allows people to discover just enough information to keep them moving, but never enough to understand the entire structure. And if the crows appear before major disruptions, they could represent the town's equivalent of a system notification. Something has changed. Someone has crossed a boundary. The cycle is moving to its next stage. Now think about what crows traditionally represent. Death, memory, observation, intelligence. But in From, the most important of these may be memory. Because memory is one of the show's biggest weapons. Characters forget. Characters remember things they shouldn't. Images return. Past and present begin to overlap. People experience things that feel connected to events they could not possibly have witnessed. That means the town may not simply trap people's bodies. It may manipulate their understanding of time. And if time is part of the mystery, then the crows suddenly become much more important. Because what if they aren't arriving before disasters? What if they're arriving because the town has reached the same point in the cycle again? That would mean the crows aren't looking toward the future. They're recognizing the past. And that creates a terrifying possibility for Season 4. What if the residents aren't experiencing a sequence of random supernatural events? What if they're replaying a pattern that has happened before? The monsters could be part of the pattern. The trees could be part of the pattern. The strange symbols could be part of the pattern. And the crows could be the signal that tells us, we're here again. That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is what happens immediately after they arrive. Because if the crows are connected to the cycle, then every appearance should be treated like a piece of evidence. Not scenery, not atmosphere, evidence. And once you start looking at them that way, an uncomfortable pattern begins to emerge. The town doesn't seem to announce its biggest changes with explosions. It announces them quietly. A strange sound, a vision, a symbol, a bird watching from a tree. Then suddenly, someone's entire understanding of reality collapses. That is exactly how a controlled system would behave. It wouldn't scream, it would signal. And the crows may be the signal. But here's the most dangerous implication. If the crows know when the next disaster is coming, then someone or something must know too. Because birds don't understand supernatural cycles. Unless they're being influenced. Unless they're being used. Or unless the crows themselves are connected to whatever intelligence controls the town. And if that final possibility is true, then the residents have been watching the wrong creatures. They've spent all this time studying the monsters. But maybe the monsters are only the soldiers. Maybe the crows are the observers. And maybe the thing watching from above has been there since the beginning. Which raises one final question for this first part. What if the crows don't appear before disaster because they know something terrible is coming? What if they appear because they know exactly who is about to die? If the crows are truly connected to the town's supernatural cycle, then their appearances become much more disturbing when we look at the people standing beneath them. Because there is another pattern hiding inside the mystery. The disasters in From rarely feel completely random. Someone discovers something. Someone remembers something. Someone sees something they were never supposed to see. And then reality pushes back. That is the pattern we should be watching. Not simply what happens, but what happens immediately after someone gets too close to the truth. This is where the crow theory becomes much darker. The birds may represent the moment the town identifies a threat. Not a physical threat. A person who has become dangerous because they are beginning to understand. Think about the people who have repeatedly challenged the town's rules. Victor investigates things that everyone else has learned to fear. Tabitha refuses to accept that the town is simply a place she cannot escape. Jade keeps digging through symbols and connections long after a normal person would have stopped. Boyd keeps trying to understand the monsters instead of simply surviving them. And every time someone moves closer to the hidden architecture of the town, the story becomes more dangerous. That may not be coincidence. It may be the mechanism. The town doesn't necessarily punish people for being curious. It may punish them for becoming aware. And if the crows are watching when that awareness reaches a certain level, their appearance could be the visual marker of that transition. The person has crossed the line. The countdown begins. But here's what changes everything. The town may not need to kill someone immediately. It may first destabilize them. Give them visions. Give them impossible information. Make them question whether what they're seeing is real. Then introduce something personal. A dead loved one. A child. A familiar voice. A memory. A promise. The goal may not be physical destruction. The goal may be psychological collapse. Because a person who no longer trusts their own mind is much easier to control. And this could explain why dreams are so important in From. Dreams aren't just horror sequences. They may be another layer of communication. The town doesn't always attack the body. Sometimes it attacks perception. And once perception becomes unreliable, the victim can no longer distinguish between warning and manipulation. That brings us back to the crows. A crow watching from a distance creates a very specific feeling. You're being observed, but you don't know by whom. That's exactly the emotional language the show has built around the town itself. Someone is always watching. Someone knows more. Someone appears to understand what the residents don't. And the worst part? The residents rarely know when they're being tested. This is where the crow theory connects to the monsters. The creatures appear to be the obvious predators. They come at night. They smile. They imitate people. They exploit trust. But what if they're not the ones deciding who gets targeted? What if they're simply responding to instructions from something deeper? Because the monsters don't behave like animals. They don't simply attack whatever is closest. They manipulate. They wait. They choose. They speak. They know names. They know personal details. That means intelligence is already embedded inside the system. So, Why couldn't the crows be another part of that same intelligence? Perhaps not every crow is supernatural. Perhaps that's not necessary. Maybe the town simply uses ordinary creatures as part of its larger pattern. A signal doesn't need to be magical if the system controls when it appears. And this is where it gets darker. What if the crows aren't sent to the town? What if they're already inside the cycle? Imagine that the town has existed through multiple versions of the same nightmare. Different people, different generations, different attempts to escape, but the same fundamental events repeating. The crows would then become witnesses. They've seen it before. They've watched people arrive. They've watched people investigate. They've watched people resist. And they've watched them disappear. Suddenly, the birds become something more terrifying than an omen. They become memory carriers, living reminders that this has happened before. And that would make the seemingly harmless imagery of birds much more important. Because the show's central mystery has always involved repetition. The same symbols, the same questions, the same impossible locations, the same psychological traps, the same struggle between people who want to escape and forces that seem determined to keep them inside. So maybe the town doesn't need to invent new horrors. Maybe it only needs to restart old ones. That would explain why certain characters seem strangely connected to events that happened long before they arrived. Their stories may not be independent. They may be different positions inside the same recurring structure. And if the crows appear when the structure is about to repeat itself, then their presence becomes a timestamp. A marker saying, the cycle has reached this point again. Now consider what that means for the future. If the pattern repeats, then the next major disaster may already have a place inside the cycle. Which means Season 4 could be less about discovering what will happen and more about discovering why it keeps happening. That is a much bigger mystery, because stopping one monster would not end it. Escaping one tunnel would not end it. Even leaving the town might not end it. The real objective would be breaking the mechanism that creates the repetition. And maybe that is why the town keeps giving its residents clues. Not enough to escape, just enough to keep them searching. Because curiosity may itself be part of the trap. Think about it. A person discovers something strange. They investigate. They uncover another mystery. That mystery leads somewhere else. The deeper they go, the more emotionally invested they become. Eventually, they cannot stop. The town has turned survival into investigation. And investigation into obsession. That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is whether the town needs them to keep searching. Because perhaps every discovery moves the cycle forward. Every answer unlocks the next stage. Every revelation brings the next disaster closer. And the crows appear because the system recognizes that progression. That could explain why they feel so unnerving even when nothing immediately happens. The bird isn't the event. The bird is the confirmation. Something has already changed. And if that's true, then the most important crow appearance may not be the one connected to the biggest death we've already seen. It may be the next one. Because when the crows return, we should not ask, what disaster are they warning us about? We should ask, who just discovered something they weren't supposed to know? That question could completely change how Season 4 is watched. Because the next victim may not be the weakest character. They may be the character who understands the most. And if the town really does select its victims based on knowledge, then the people closest to solving the mystery may also be the people in the greatest danger. Which leaves us with a horrifying possibility. The crows may not be watching the town at all. They may be watching one specific person. Waiting for that person to remember. Waiting for them to understand. Waiting for them to finally realize that they've seen this place before. And when that happens, the next disaster won't be a surprise. It will be the next step. The most terrifying possibility is not that the crows predict death. It is that they recognize memory. Because if the town operates through a repeating cycle, then there may be one thing the system cannot completely control. People can forget, but they can also remember. And every time someone remembers something that connects the present to the past, the entire structure becomes unstable. That may be why the most important revelations in From rarely arrive as simple explanations. They arrive as fragments. A symbol, a song, a face, a voice, a location. A dream that feels too real. Something buried inside the mind suddenly rises to the surface. And when it does, the town reacts. This is where the crow theory reaches its final stage. Maybe the crows aren't predicting disasters at all. Maybe they appear when someone is approaching a memory that could break the cycle. Think about what that would mean. The town doesn't fear people escaping physically. It fears people understanding why they are trapped. Because if the residents discover the rules behind the system, then the system loses its greatest advantage. Confusion. Fear keeps people inside. But understanding creates resistance. And this may explain why the town constantly produces contradictory information. Every answer creates another question. Every clue leads to another clue. Every apparent solution reveals another layer. It is almost as if the truth has been deliberately fragmented. And this is the detail everyone missed. If the town wanted to hide itself completely, it wouldn't leave clues. But it does. It leaves symbols. It leaves patterns. It leaves recurring imagery. It gives people just enough evidence to become obsessed with finding the rest. That means the mystery itself could be part of the trap. Unless the characters learn how to interpret the clues differently. And maybe the crows are one of those clues. Not an omen. Not decoration. A marker, a witness, a sign that someone has reached a forbidden level of awareness. Now imagine the crows appearing before a major disaster for a completely different reason. The disaster isn't coming because the crows arrived. The crows arrived because the person at the center of the disaster had already triggered something. That distinction matters. It means the supernatural event begins before the characters realize it. The visible disaster is only the final stage. The real event begins inside someone's mind. A memory returns. A connection is made. A truth is recognized. Then the town responds. And if that is the mechanism, Season 4 could become a battle between memory and control. The characters aren't simply trying to survive monsters. They're trying to remember enough to understand what happened before. That makes characters like Victor far more important. Victor's strange relationship with memory may not simply be a personality trait. His ability to remember fragments of the past could make him uniquely valuable to the mystery. He has lived inside the nightmare longer than almost anyone. He has witnessed patterns repeat. He has learned that certain things should not be disturbed. But perhaps the most important thing about Victor isn't what he remembers. It's what he has forgotten. Because forgotten memories may contain the information the town cannot allow him to recover. And if the crows are connected to memory, then their presence around moments of revelation becomes much more sinister. They could be watching the return of something buried, something the town thought was gone. The same possibility applies to the other characters. The people arriving in the town may not be random pieces on a board. They may have been selected because of something they carry with them. Not an object. Not a weapon, a psychological connection, a memory, a relationship, a role, something that makes them capable of continuing the cycle. And this is where the theory becomes genuinely disturbing. What if some residents aren't simply trapped in the town? What if they're necessary for it to function? If the cycle requires certain people to discover certain things, then removing one person could disrupt the entire sequence. That might explain why some characters survive events that should have killed them. Their survival may not be luck. They may still be needed. The town doesn't necessarily protect them because it cares about them. It protects the role they play. And when that role is finished, the protection disappears. That would completely change how we interpret survival in From. A character surviving a seemingly impossible situation would no longer automatically mean they are safe. It could mean the opposite. It could mean the system still has plans for them. And perhaps the crows know which people are still useful. That is why their appearance feels so uncomfortable. They don't behave like frightened animals. They observe. They wait. They remain present. Almost like witnesses at a crime scene. But here's the final twist. What if the crows aren't connected to the monsters at all? What if they're connected to whatever existed before the monsters? Something older. Something that doesn't need to chase people. Something that only needs to maintain the cycle. The monsters could be the visible face of the town's evil. The crows could represent the invisible intelligence behind it. And if so, the monsters may not even understand the entire system themselves. They may simply be another layer of it. That would explain why the creatures sometimes behave in ways that seem almost ritualistic. They aren't hunting randomly. They're participating. And if the town has multiple layers of control, then the crows could be our first visual clue toward the highest layer. The thing nobody has properly identified. The thing watching from above. The thing that knows when the cycle is about to restart. And that brings us back to the title. Why do crows arrive before every major disaster? Maybe because disasters aren't random events in this place. Maybe they're scheduled points in a supernatural cycle. The crows arrive when the cycle reaches its next checkpoint. Someone remembers. Someone discovers. Someone breaks a rule. The town reacts. And the disaster follows. Over and over. Until someone finally refuses to play their assigned role. That could be the real path to escape. Not finding another road. Not defeating another monster. Not simply reaching the outside world. Breaking the pattern. Because if the town is built around repetition, then escape may require doing something that has never happened before. A choice the system cannot predict. A character remembering what they were supposed to forget. A person refusing to follow the vision. Someone choosing not to investigate the clue. Or perhaps someone finally realizing that the clues themselves are bait. And when that happens, the crows may disappear. Not because the danger is gone, but because the cycle has been broken. That would be the ultimate reversal. The birds everyone thought were announcing death may actually be announcing repetition. And the moment they stop appearing could be the most important moment in the entire series, because it would mean the town has lost control of the pattern. But there is one final question. One question that makes this theory much more frightening than it first appears. If the crows are witnesses to the cycle, how many times have they already watched the story happen before we ever met the people of From? And if they've been watching for that long, what happens when they finally see someone break the cycle?